What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Culture Wave Media Network. We're here with another episode of the Cinema Wave podcast to talk to you guys about the Florence Pugh and Andrew Garfield led movie, We Live in Time. This movie is directed by John Crowley, who also has experience doing these kinds of movies with his previous film, Brooklyn. I am one of your hosts. My name is Darian Scalamoni. I am joined this time by Liz Seiko.
Hello, everybody.
And we are on a romantic path discussing this film.
Absolutely.
Because it has two of our finest actors, in my opinion, working together for the first time with a director of John Crowley's caliber who has done this before. So let's start with that. Are you a fan of Brooklyn, his previous movie that was a Best Picture nominee? And were you excited by the prospect of this happening? We actually put out the first look behind the scenes pictures like over a year ago, and people lost their minds about Florence and Andrew doing this movie together. So what was your anticipation level for that, and also John Crowley's previous work with Brooklyn?
Yeah, I love Brooklyn. I think a lot of people love it, and so I was excited to see just another one of his films come out, especially with these two as the leads. I mean, this was definitely one of the films that I was highly anticipating for this year. I also purposely tried to stay away just from as much spoilers as possible. So I went into this film with obviously like the basic knowledge of obviously there's an illness that comes on. You see that Florence Pugh's character does shave her head at a certain point. So you can just make the connections that it's probably to cancer of some sort. But besides that, I tried to stay away. And so going in, I was a little bit more on the blind side. And I walked away loving this film. I think it's much funnier than I anticipated, honestly. I thought it was going to be a heavy, heavy drama, which it is at times. There's definitely heavy scenes, but I think to the extent and the applause of John Crowley's writing, the heavy moments are outweighed by very high highs of laughter and joy in the relationship that Andrew and Florence establish early on. So I don't know. I just really loved this film. It's super grounded and natural. It's kind of like the rom-droms that I love, where it doesn't feel like things are overstated or over dramatic. It feels like you are watching a couple going through life and experience these things that everyday people experience, and you're just happening to watch it on screen and performed by two incredible performances. So overall, I loved it. I think that it was a great partnership between the two leads, and then also John Crowley.
Yeah, so I also was a excuse me, a massive fan of Brooklyn, especially when it came out. I know Saoirse Ronan had done previous things before it, but in my mind, it kind of like put her on the map. It was something that like really put her in a different stratosphere, and I loved the sort of love triangle dynamic that came with her and Donald Gleason and Emery Cohen in that movie. So I was really excited for this. Crowley directed it. Nick Payne actually wrote the movie, and I was worried when I first read that because he had done another rom-drom that I was not a huge fan of, called The Last Letter from Your Lover, which I don't know if you had seen.
I never saw that.
It was an Amazon movie, starred Shailene Woodley. I believe Callum Turner was one of the male leads in it. Also,
okay. I
Joe
know about
Alwyn
this
was
film.
in it. Felicity Jones was the other female lead. And it lacked something for me in the way that like you said, this movie had a lot of the rom-drom stuff you really like. That was the opposite for me. I was like, this movie's not really working for me. Yeah, a bit. Okay. And I just don't think, maybe this is no offense to any of the lead performers, it might have been the script, but I didn't think the acting was really up to par, and maybe the characters weren't as well developed. So that scared me going into it. I was pleasantly surprised with how much I did enjoy this movie. I had heard initially when this, like, the spec script was going around and when they attached these two, that it was like plot details are under wraps, but it is in vein with something along the line of About Time, which I've discussed on this channel multiple times. It's probably my favorite romantic drama ever. So that was high expectations for me going into it. The other part of it is I love Andrew Garfield so much. And I think I was saying to Vinny off camera before we started recording, I have liked everything that Florence Pugh has done, And then after seeing this, it was like, wait, no, I had a realization. I think she's amazing in everything she's ever done that I've seen her in. And this movie is a standout for me, even despite all the other things she's done, because I haven't seen her do romance, I don't think, really necessarily in a deeper sense. I didn't see Don't Worry, Darling. I know it's a very different sort of
Mm-hmm.
movie anyway, based on what I've heard. I've heard she's good in it, but
There's a lot more going on, I would say.
yeah, it's more like psychological in terms of what's happening in the movie, probably too. This is a very human story that comes across with the relationship between her and Andrew Garfield. And I think their chemistry just radiates off the screen. Like there's so many great scenes in terms of just the two performers just like going at it in such a great way, and it could be going at it as like whether it's an argument scene or it's going at it in terms of just loving one another, or it's going at it in terms of a disagreement between two characters. And I'm like so happy that this is what the end product was, because there was so much talent attached behind the camera and in front of it, that I agree with you. I think it's like one of the biggest pleasant surprises of the year so far. um
I do want to ask you,
yeah,
so
absolutely.
going into it, you kind of thought that it was very similar. People were comparing it to About Time. Do you feel like they're on the same playing field? And if so, like how?
In terms of my like favoritism, like in terms of
No,
liking
like I
it,
guess
or in
like
terms of the story structure.
story structure, and do they actually emulate each other or
I
not at
don't
all?
really think so. And
I
I
don't
know
either.
and I know that again, like this is I guess a spoiler if you haven't seen the movie, but it's kind of in the title in both movies. It deals with time and the impact of what time means to people. In About Time, it's in a very literal sense where you're having a character time travel.
Mm-hmm.
In this, it has a very interesting story structure in which it bounces around to different time periods back and forth, showcasing our characters before they're dating, during really poignant times and high points, and then a lot of low points, which you alluded to some of them already with the illness that Florence's character deals with. But the whole relationship is starting on her hitting him with her car,
Mm-hmm.
which I also think is really fun because it kind of takes a romantic comedy cliche and it does it in a way more playful and realistic way. Well, I don't even know if it's realistic, but it's at least approached with a lot more sort of care instead of being like, "Oh my god, I hit you in my car. This is crazy." Like I don't love that
No.
sometimes in rom-coms, you know. And I think that I would prefer my roms to be drams. Ooh.
Ooh.
But I just really appreciated what they went for with this movie, and that there was so it felt like there was so much trust between the two actors. And for you being someone that's acted, I'm curious on how that came across to you. If the chemistry really did feel similar to you in terms of these two actors really giving all of themselves to one another for what this movie was trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I think chemistry is definitely something that kind of either they have or they don't have between actors. You can kind of put it on, but I think in order to carry it throughout a film of this extent and carry it throughout this long, it takes work. And with that being and the way that I mean that is their relationship on screen, it emulates a relationship that's been lived in, not just a new relationship that there's sparks flying.
Mm-hmm.
They show that very nicely in the beginning scenes, or not even the beginning scenes, just like the early on ones of their relationship when they're meeting each other. They definitely show that they're trying to get to know each other, but the scenes of later on in their relationship towards like the later points, it just feels very lived in, and that they know each other, and that these are conversations that you can tell either they've had this conversation before multiple times, or this is a total new conversation that they're trying to tread for the first time in this like long-term relationship, which that type of acting, that just takes a level of crafting that I think a lot of people knew Andrew Garfield could do, because he has been in these very big heavyweight films. I think a lot of people were underestimating Florence in her like early on films, just thinking like, oh, she's just the new name, like she's getting the big cast. But I think that this film shows off that she's a heavy hitter actor, and that she can take on these simpler scripts and just add to it. Because I'll be honest, I don't think script wise this carries the weight if it wasn't the two of them.
I totally agree with you.
I
I
think,
think that this
yeah.
movie might come off like the last letter from your lover
Yeah,
if it's not for the caliber. And part of that also could be a directing thing too, because I do think that it was kind of a three-handed thing at the same time. Like I think Crowley, I don't want to speak for him, I'm not the director, but it's more so like I think he gave room for you to talk about these lived-in experiences with these two actors. I don't know if you've seen any of the marketing materials or them discussing working with one another or just being in the same space as one another, but it feels like they have experienced life together in a deeper sense.
Yeah.
And it's not in the way where like we talked about last year with Anyone But You, where it was like Glenn Powell and Sydney Sweeney were putting on an act and they knew what they were doing for marketing. I think that they really, for the craftsmanship of it, and I understand where you're coming from with Florence, because I don't even mean to say this in my own way, but I think that there are a lot of other actresses that, like you were talking about, are getting this like showcase sort of thing.
Because they have a big following.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, even in terms of, which I know you're not a huge fan of the movies, but like her introduction in the MCU, she's playing like a secondary, like Black Widow is always like the sixth Avenger or the fifth Avenger, you know what I mean? And she's playing a member of the Black Widow, the Black Widows, I should say. So like, it's not the same as a caliber of like a Zendaya, like doing like leading a show like Euphoria and then playing MJ in Spider-Man, or doing Anya Taylor-Joy where she's basically playing a lead superhero and then she's playing Furiosa. Like it's different. But I think I agree with you in terms of the two performers and Florence especially. I think Andrew's really good in this movie. I excuse me. I hope, based on what I've seen this year, that Florence gets an Oscar nomination for this.
Wow.
I don't know if she will.
I don't know if she will, actually.
Because I think it's like what you were talking about, where I think the story may be a little too simple. The problem with that, which bothers me, is that her performance is so great and she elevates the words on the page to a different extent in this with her emotions and the way she performs in this, that we should recognize that for an actor being able to take something so simplistic but something that feels so authentic and raw and real to the human, that it doesn't need to be something as showy as, oh well, this actress is completely transforming their face, or this actor is losing a lot of weight and then they're like, to me this is such a great grounded performance for her to put her in this, not a different stratosphere in terms of her ability, but just to show that she literally can do everything. Like this girl can do literally everything, and I think she's one of the finest actors working in the industry, and I think this movie really showcases that in a different way.
The only reason I have hesitation of her getting nominated is because I felt this way about the a film that she was in last year, A Good Person. I loved her performance, and she was, I mean, it's in the same circle, I would say, as this film, of it's very real, but it talks about different subjects. That film talks about addiction and grief that she's going through. And I mean, her performance is gorgeous, but a lot of people slept on her performance because, again, I don't think that script was one of the best scripts of the year. So I just feel like, unfortunately, I think the performances that get nominated, they also have to correlate with a fantastic script. I think that there are fantastic moments that are really beautiful, but I don't know if overall the film has like the tightest screenplay.
Okay. I think that's interesting. I mean, because I'm thinking about just like in films that you've discussed on our channel, like The Holdovers is one where you're not a huge fan of the screenplay, but Davine Joy Randolph gets an Oscar for it. It's different.
It's
She's
different
supporting
though.
versus
It's different
lead, but
because I don't know. That one I think also has a little bit more going on. This one, it's definitely just more of a study about a relationship and them really going through just simple moments of life, whether they're dark or light, and trying to navigate them, with a lot being said underneath without saying it. I think sometimes I don't know who knows what the Academy wants at the end of the day.
And that's,
but I just feel like a lot of people are going to maybe sleep on this film a little bit, unfortunately.
Yeah. The only reason I kind of disagree, and I think this is very much a timely reason, I think is a really weak year for movies. And I think that this is a film. So I just did a little bit while as you were talking too. So Brooklyn, which was his most acclaimed movie, which is why I think his next movie, which I forgot that he did it because I've never seen it, but he did this movie, The Goldfinch, that was like really highly. It was like a very rich piece of literature that people were like excited for this movie to come out, and it bombed.
Yeah.
And it was supposed to be his big follow up to Brooklyn, didn't do well, but it was Brooklyn was nominated for Best Picture. It was nominated for Screenplay, and Saoirse was nominated. And I wonder if again that was similar sort of thing. Now Saoirse's dealing with two men kind of fighting over her, and the difference in terms of her navigating in different locales and all that stuff. But I genuinely think Florence might be just as good in this as Saoirse was in Brooklyn, and I think she has a chance. I don't know. I'd have to look again, really, at like the performances to see. But I don't know. I think she's so good in this movie. I hope she gets a nomination.
The only reason is because I've been a fan of hers since like I think I saw her. The first thing I really watched of hers was maybe the Lady Macbeth. Like
yeah, that was the one that like kind of put her on, I think, casting directors.
Yeah,
radar.
I watched that because I was like, oh cool, let me watch this.
Yeah.
And then obviously Midsummer was just huge, and then Little Women. So I don't know. I've been a fan of hers, and I think that she really delivers every film. But for me, I feel like people just still associate with her of like, oh, she's just like a new big named person that people love watching her cook on Instagram, and like she has a big personality and a great voice that like is very clear, and like people can associate with who she is with that. And so I hope that people start really seeing like she's actually an incredible actress and can be handed anything, any type of material, and can work with it. The only thing that I'm saying really about the screenplay is I don't know if there's anything. I love this film. I really enjoyed the performances. I think that the material for me, it definitely hit home. I connected to it a lot. I just don't know if there's anything necessarily new or innovative that was in this story that I haven't seen in other films.
I think that's fair.
Do you just?
I don't disagree. I just don't know if that's always what the Academy looks for. I think that's what you want.
Well, I'm not even talking about the Academy now at this point. Like for me, when I'm looking at this film, I think the only thing that really they tried to make this a little bit more unique and to stand out was probably the time jumps. Which, what did you think about them?
So it didn't bother me at all. I thought that the other thing is I kind of like how they, personally, I like how they didn't dumb it down for the audience, because I still think if you're a smart enough viewer, it's very obvious to indicate the different points in time that we're dealing with these characters. And I did like that it didn't, because to me it didn't feel like it beat you over the head with it. I thought it was done in strategic and smart places to do it, while still going in the background of this whole idea, which Tobias, which is Andrew Garfield's character, and Almut, which is Florence's character, are both so critical of time and what time means. And it's something that I feel like is never discussed on a human level in film enough, which is why I think it's why this movie resonates so much with me, because personally, like, I feel very similar sometimes where I'm like, oh, like I just had 24 hours in a day, and like, did I get enough done for me? You know what I mean? And so much of what Florence's character Alma does, especially when she's amongst her illness that she suffers from, is she's always like, I need more time to do the things that I want to accomplish while having a family, while having a relationship with Tobias, while establishing who I want to be and what came before and all these things. And so for me, it was a really good cue to also represent the impact of how time goes like that in people's lives, because you blink and you just wake up and you're like, oh my God, like I woke up yesterday, it was September, and now it's November. And it's like how I feel. Like as the older you get, that's kind of what happens. And throughout the relationship, what was happening. Did you not like the time jumps as much?
So when I first came out of the film, it bothered me. I don't know if it was the editing or the structure. I just wish that, and this was me first coming out, these are my thoughts. I just didn't really see the linear line, I guess, between all of them. But the more that I've like sat with it, I guess it makes sense, because I don't think that they wanted this film to have a linear line going through each
I agree.
scene. I
I
think
don't think
that
that he intended for that at all.
no, I think that they wanted it to be quick quick frames of just this relationship and the different moments that have, I don't know, influenced their lives. Um a part of me still thinks that like I I personally like when there's a little bit linear of a line, but I understand why they didn't do it. So like I can't really like rag on them for it. Um I just think that it was really beautiful, all the different like messages and like undertones that they were putting in there without making it, like you said, so hitting the audience over the head.
Mm.
Cuz for me, there's a lot that people can walk out with, and there's different opinions, cuz I was even looking online and some people have different opinions on like what happened in the ending.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Some people, I mean, at this point, we're talking spoilers. So some
Mm.
people don't believe that she died.
I think that's interesting
Because
because I fully believe that she died.
I do
But
too. But some people are saying because they are jumping so much that it's not necessarily
that could just be a different
it
point
could
in
just
time.
be another point of time. And like the reason somebody's saying is because the dog, that they got the dog at the end.
Mm-hmm.
They're saying like, well, why would they get the dog after she passes? And so they're
That's
like,
interesting.
it's an interesting take. I don't necessarily agree with
They
it.
also could have. They also could have still. They could have gotten the dog while she was sick, and then the dog still been.
That's how I feel about it.
That's
Like
how
the
I
dog
feel,
doesn't
too.
really mean
That's
anything.
so interesting, man.
But
people really
there
wanna
are
dumpster
people
dive
that
on
were
theories.
like, if they are leaning fully into this thing of there's no timeline and everything's just cut, why does that final shot or final scene between Andrew Garfield's character and the daughter have to be like, oh well, this is after she died?
Yeah,
because you don't know.
that's interesting. I don't feel the same way.
I don't either, because I feel like the way that they did it with the ice skating of saying like there
It was
she
finite.
goes.
It was finite. I agree.
Mm-hmm.
But wow, that's so interesting. I didn't see that. This is why I don't go on social media for this stuff. But that's so interesting to me that that's what people think about this movie. Scenes that stood out to you. What were certain things that um again, there's so much in this movie that felt so real in terms of the interactions with the 2 characters. I mean, I think when Tobias gets the reality check of her doing the competition, that whole scene is phenomenal. I think the birth scene is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's such a beautiful moment, but also something that is like has really great laugh out loud moments. Like you talked about how the movie was humorous. So what were some scenes that stood out to you in terms of, especially in terms of the acting, because so much of this is reliant on the shoulders of Andrew and Florence?
Yeah, I would say probably the most influential scene for me was the one where, like you said, when she tells him, I'm doing this competition,
Mm-hmm.
and just that whole conversation and point of view that she has of wanting to leave something behind for her daughter to be able to remember her by, so that and she says, she's like, I don't want to just be somebody's dead mother when I'm gone, which I've seen a lot of. I mean, there's so many films about like terminal illnesses and uh like the emotions surrounding it, and I just don't think that a lot of films talk about that, of wanting to achieve something to leave behind to people. I think that it is so focused on like, oh, well, I just need to like use the time that I have now and spend quality time with people. But then obviously, and this relates to the name of the film, We Live in Time, it's like time can also be the future and time can also be the past. So yes, they are trying to live in time, but she's also struggling with trying to think of, okay, well, what am I going to leave for the future for my daughter? Because although her life might be ending, her daughter's is just beginning, so she still wants to be a part of that.
Yeah, and they do it too. They mess with time from the very beginning of this movie when, correct me if I'm wrong, but the opening of this is when she gets her diagnosis again.
The like opening is when she's going on a run.
Yes.
She's getting like the eggs.
Yes.
And then
she gets the second cancer diagnosis.
Then she gets this, yeah.
And she has this line where she says to Tobias, where she's basically like, we could either have she initially says, like 8 months, and then she goes on to say it could be 9, 10, 11, 12 months, shitty months of me puking my guts out and not getting anywhere again, or having 6 really unbelievable months of just living in the moment and doing beautiful things together. And it's so interesting how they do that so much of the time, and they play with decision making so much, which is so real, and it's never shown in movies. It's just like, well, this is the decision we have to make, this is what we have to do, so let's jump to it.
Or not even the conversation of the decision. It's just, oh, on to the next. And we're in this next
we just
moment.
see it. Like, they talk about these are the options you have, and then there's no conversation. It's just like you jump to, well, oh, this is what the option that they must have chosen. And I love the scene too with them when she gets diagnosed for the first time with cancer, when she says to him, like, so I can go this route, or I can go this route. And the vulnerability there is just so remarkable. And I think for the people who may not know this, Andrew Garfield lost his mother right before this movie, and he took a break because of the passing of his mother, who he was incredibly close to, and he's talked about it now, and he's doing, oh my god, him on Sesame Street, I cried my eyes out. He's talking about how much he misses his mother, and he talked in a couple interviews about just how so therapeutic this movie was for him. Bet. And I think that's another thing. It's so therapeutic in the human experience of losing people and having to see people go through terminal illness, like what that felt like, because you're just sitting there and you're like, oh my god, like I don't know how this is going to go, and it just keeps getting worse, and you think it's going to get better. And I like how they jump between time for that, because it's also a lot more digestible, I feel like, for the audience, even if people might be upset with not having a linear structure because they might be confused. Like, there's a lot of dark in this, like there's a lot of reality check of this woman is dealing not only with I was talking to my cousin about this movie, just telling him about how much I loved it, and I was like, it's a tearjerker. Like, this is a movie that, like, if you want a good cry, I go, you're gonna want to watch this one. And he goes, let me guess, she's got cancer. And I go, not only does she have cancer, she gets cancer twice. And it's like, it just hits you at so many different times, that I don't know, it's a beautiful, beautiful movie. It's really, really beautiful. The relationship between the two of them, I just think, is so fantastic in this movie, and it's definitely one of my favorites that I've seen this year. I don't know if you feel similar to that, or
no, I do. And I think what also makes me love it a lot more is that John Crowley doesn't dwell on those heavy moments, because there's a lot of films that when they're talking about topics like this, they can sit in that sadness and just really like kind of rip their audiences like hearts out in a way. And I love that he is able to show these heavy moments of people that are dealing with cancer and show that, like, yeah, this is a very heavy moment, but then all of a sudden you can go to the next, and that person who is diagnosed is making it a lighter moment because they don't want to live for the next year or however they have in like depression or sadness, which I think he did a beautiful job of writing Florence's character to be this strong and optimistic character who is kind of taking like her illness by the reins and saying like, no, I don't want this to define me. Yes, it will be a part of my story, but it won't be my entire story.
I agree.
Which I think a lot of films, again, they just make it like, oh, she had cancer and that was what she became. And it just shows that what's her character's name? Almet, right? Yeah. She's like fighting so hard against that to not just be labeled as a woman that had ovarian cancer.
Yeah, I agree. It's a fantastic movie. It's incredibly nuanced. Again, two of my absolute favorite people to watch coming on screen to do a movie like this. It's one that I'll probably return to a bunch of times, especially for a good cry.
I know.
I did cry at the end.
I cried multiple times throughout.
I've heard that a lot of people have had a lot of tears.
Just like randomly, all of a sudden it would just like happen. Like, oh my God, when he throws out the save the dates.
Oh my God.
And then he starts crying. I'm like, oh my God.
And it's so hard. Like, that's another thing. Like, I just think that there's it's so slept on in certain films too, where there's just a real sense of like these two individuals that are trying to come together to accomplish everything that they can as a unit while still being so independent with their own thought and what they want
Mm-hmm.
and trying to make it work. And that's so much of the DNA of relationships and mature relationships. And as you get older and trying to navigate that, that most people, if they've been in that situation before, that they'll recognize those moments where it's like, oh man, like I remember that time where like I felt this way and my partner felt this way and we couldn't agree on it, and that
Mm-hmm.
like still sits with me. And those are things that don't go away. And like the same, I would really describe this movie as therapeutic, the same way that Andrew Garfield does in so many different ways. um and I'm so happy that it winded up being as good as I was hoping for it to be.
Mm-hmm. I also love I truly loved the ending of not having it be a legitimate dying scene. And that instead it was an interpretation of them ice skating and her slowly going away from them. I also really love the like parallel of uh when they first started talking about her like past skating history. I was like, this is a little like quirky to throw in here. I was like, I
Mhm.
wonder why we're like sprinkling this in. But to then have it relate to her father who passed away and her not being able to skate because it was something that she did with him.
Mhm.
I think it's just beautiful because by her going and skating, she's then like, well, I don't want my daughter to not be able to cook because I was a chef or something like that. And so
Yeah.
it's just doing a full circle of, in order to pass some things on, you also have to look on the past of yourself. And I just think that the ending was really beautiful without having to be literal.
And I think that's part going back to what I said before. I think Andrew's also great in this movie, and I think he's a fantastic actor. I think he was robbed for an Academy Award for Tick Tick Boom. But there's a little bit more to her character and her journey, which gets to see, regardless of what you think the ending is, it becomes, like you said, full circle. And I really like. I'm think like I can't recall too many performances by female actors this year that have made me feel as much as Florence made me feel in this movie.
Mhm.
Like I really want her to get a nomination. Again, maybe she won't.
The only
But
other film that made me feel the same way, and I actually cried harder in that film, was His Three Daughters.
okay, which I still haven't had a chance to finish.
Yeah, so like We Live in Time, I definitely got teary-eyed and I cried multiple times. His Three Daughters, no, I
Broke
sobbed.
you.
Like I was
They could
like
be like stepsisters probably in terms of like themes and like
yes, they're
yeah.
very much related, and touch on very similar topics. This one focuses more on obviously like romantic relationship and time,
Mhm.
while the other one focuses more on like family
And grief.
and grief
Yeah.
and like those dynamics. Um, but yeah, wow, both of those.
Heavy hitters.
God,
Really gets a good cry
man,
out of you.
love them.
Well, Liz, give your overall broad thoughts and give us your score whenever you are ready.
Ooh, overall thoughts. I mean, this is a really beautiful film. I think that anybody that has ever not necessarily had a relationship with cancer, but has a relationship of losing anybody can relate to it. I think it's also just a gorgeous conversation about time and the legacy that you want to leave, but then also the hardship of not focusing too much on the future and really living in the moment. The acting is unmatched. The star power in this, like gorgeous. I think that the connection between the two of them really carried this film in ways that I don't know it would have hit me as hard if it wasn't for their two performances. I really don't have much to say besides when I first came out. I didn't necessarily love the editing, but it has grown on me. So I wonder if I watch it again, if I'll feel different because now I can focus more on the intimate details rather than getting a whole scope of the storyline. And so I'm a really big fan of this film, and I guess I'll give my score, which is a 9.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, I agree with pretty much everything you've said. I think that regardless of maybe if the one potential con or lesser aspect of this movie may be the script, I do think that simplicity is so important, especially when you're trying to tell a story like this. And simple kind of works maybe even a little bit better when you're trying to deal with human themes and emotions.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this movie is intimate. I think this movie is very thoughtful, and it makes you feel seen in a lot of ways, makes people feel like they can experience these things in their own ways, whether it's with relationships or like you talked about with grief and losing people. Um, and I just think it's a very sincere piece of work. I think Crowley's direction is really well done in this, and I think Andrew Garfield and Florence Pugh, as I've already championed so much in this review, are so fantastic in the movie that it makes it a must see for the year. And especially if you're a fan of romance and you're a fan of drama
Mm-hmm.
and you want a good cry, this is definitely the one
This
for
is
you
it.
if we live in time. So my score will also be a 9. Look
Oh,
at
look at
that. Right on
us.
the same mark for the one of the first times I think
Yeah.
ever. Just love that. But let us know in the comments what your guys' thoughts are on We Live in Time. Did you guys love this movie as much as we did? Most of the audiences are loving it. It's
Mm-hmm.
already made I think like 4.5 million, which is really good for like a smaller romantic drama, and it's a really great piece of work featuring two of the best younger actors in the profession right now with Andrew Garfield and Florence Pugh. So if you haven't had a chance to check it out yet, we hope you guys check out the movie. You definitely should. And let us know in the comments when you guys do check out the movie what your thoughts are. If you guys can give this video a like as well, and you can subscribe to us. We have the Culture Wave Media Network. We're covering all things film and TV. We're currently also working for the Montclair Film Festival, covering that. I've seen a number of movies as well as Vinny has, and Zach and Mikey's going to be seeing some things this weekend. So we're really excited to share that stuff with you guys as well. Vinny and I also are covering The Penguin right now on HBO. So be sure to check that stuff out if you haven't seen that already. You could also follow us on social media. All that stuff is below and also in the description. See if you guys want to ride that wave with us as we are on the climb to 500 subscribers. We'd really appreciate if you guys could join us along for the ride. Just signing off, I am Darian Scalamoni.
I'm Liz Seiko.
And we will see you guys next time.
This is The Culture.